Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. If you're not watching this on the new WatchBox app, you're doing it all wrong. New features available on the Apple App Store or Google Play. You'll see WatchBox Studios content 1 week early, exclusive on the app. Plus, you can read editorial content from our own Jack Foster and your favorite third-party watch journals, magazines, and blogs. Also, shop our inventory, browse 3,000 pre-owned and vintage luxury watches while also storing your collection, including details of condition, box, and papers. Finally, stay in touch with me, my team, and our entire family of WatchBox client advisors around the world. I'm Tim, and I'll see you on the app. Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. Today we have something of a champions match. Returning after discussing Patek Philippe with myself and Brian Goffberg, we have Rick discussing his independence. Rick, welcome.
Tim, thanks for having me back.
Exactly, and the exciting thing here is that we have watches that run the gamut from fairly accessible to rarefied air, but they all encompass the independent watch scene. At what point in your watch collecting journey did you start to feel like this would be of interest to you? When did you start looking at independence?
Yeah, you know, the start of my independent collecting journey, Tim, really centered around FP Journe. Back 12, 15 years ago, before the brand took off in the secondary market like it has recently. And, you know, I bought a CS, an FP Journe CS, as a special anniversary piece. And that was sort of the spark to explore independent watchmaking and higher-end watchmaking in general. So that was the impetus.
And now that was before Journe went completely nuts. You're talking 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago.
Yeah. When the brand was relatively unknown, pre-owned pieces still traded at a discount to retail, back in the good old days, really.
And do you think that maybe you started with a brand that was a little bit more mainstream with watches that look a little bit more like, I don't know, watches? It doesn't seem like a lot of people say, yeah, this independent thing is cool, I'm going to start with Urwerk.
Yeah, no, I'm more of a traditionalist. I certainly appreciate what Urwerk and a lot of other people do, but traditional timekeeping and design is probably more my aesthetic.
Now, is this one of your original Journe pieces here, the Centigraphe?
That's a pre-owned piece that I bought from WatchBox, actually, but I think that is the Centigraphe is really an underappreciated, even today, less appreciated than a lot of the other Journe models, in my opinion.
Well, I think the fun thing about it is it's so darn animated. Even if I were a kid looking at this, I'd probably be holding it upside down. I'd have no idea what it was doing, but it looks fantastic.
Love the dial action, wears great. I wear the watch all the time. It's got plenty of battle scars, so it's a piece that I enjoy a lot.
Now, do you ever get the sense when you're holding one of these, it's like, okay, it's gold on gold on gold. It feels like a massive watch. It's always been one of the real, I guess, kicks with Journe. The movement, the dial, and the case, they're all precious metal.
Yeah, I love all those aspects. I didn't get into Journe early enough to appreciate the brass movement era, but shortly after that.
So this is a fun piece, but again, it's more of a gateway type of drug. I'm interested in the stuff that maybe is further off the mainstream. Like, believe me, here at WatchBox, we know Journe, but I'm really excited to hear about your experience with Benzinger. How did you even find out about Jochen Benzinger?
You know, this is just something that a group of fellow collectors and I sort of explored Benzinger and some of the things he did. And I was always impressed by his guilloche work, but until they announced this piece, the GAP1, where the movement was manufactured in partnership with Richard and Maria Habring, I mean, that's really what sparked my interest in purchasing a piece from Benzinger. And that is a beautiful watch, the movement finishing, the dial artwork, for a price point that I find to be very, very acceptable.
Yeah, I do think so. When you consider a multi-part sterling silver, traditional rose lathe cut dial, and a movement that has been skeletonized and engraved by hand, I mean, the thing about Benzinger is he is a very quiet craftsman. There are a lot of people like Benzinger, like Kurt Schaffo, like Armin Strom a long time ago when Armin Strom was a man, not a brand. And they just sort of toil in silence. They're not really great at promoting themselves, even as the stuff is absolutely sensational.
Absolutely. You know, and there are, I mean, he does things like this on his own, then he's got a couple of other brands where he does it in partnership. But his guilloche work, you'll see Benzinger work on other pieces we have here, so.
And the other thing, too, is, look, I love Joshua Shapiro. He's doing amazing things in the United States. But if you wanted comparable quality from a person who has been doing guilloche since he was 24, I mean, Benzinger is a fantastic under-the-radar choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just find the guilloche work and the dial design here to be just very, very attractive. It's a contemporary size, a very wearable watch.
Yeah, I mean, 39 millimeters, it is stainless steel, correct?
Yes.
And this watch is universally wearable. It's got a dial that, well, the first thing you think when you look at it is you're like, Roger Smith, maybe Josh Shapiro.
Right.
No, Jochen Benzinger. And like you mentioned, he's got a couple of different companies. But when it comes down to actually engraving and guilloche and all of the artisanal work, it's him.
It's beautiful. Just gorgeous.
And the other thing that's kind of cool is that you mentioned this is a Habring A11 at heart.
Yep.
So it's actually both a Habring and a Benzinger.
GAP, it's called the GAP1. It's the German-Austrian partnership. That's the behind the GAP1.
So this is a very, very cool piece. Was it customizable? Did you choose this design?
That was a standard variation. I'm not sure. There were a couple of different variations. I'm not sure if he did customized versions of this watch or not, but that's a standard version that he introduced early on.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I love Journe, but these watches are lovely. They're not very personal. This is intensely personal.
Yeah, beautiful watch.
And by the way, very wearable. So this is a great example. Maybe we'll do a quick wrist shot. You know, would you oblige me to do a wrist shot with this watch real quick?
Well,
Just show it to the camera because I think it's easy to lose a sense of perspective.
yeah.
It's a beautifully compact watch, even with those thrusting lugs. It looks like it might wear like a Breguet, but it doesn't.
Right. Very approachable. Very wearable.
So historically, Benzinger is not a company known for making its own movements, and truth be told, this isn't entirely Benzinger's own. But the folks who gave him a helping hand, they're also on the table. Tell me about your COS.
Yeah, so what intrigued me here is a pusherless chronograph system, the Crown-operated system by Richard and Maria Habring, which I just think is tremendously innovative and sleek, and it creates a clean, crisp case and dial. And I'll be honest, I think a lot of collectors have chronographs in their collection. I don't use the chronograph function that much, so to clutter it up with a lot of case furniture, if you will, you know, this is just a very elegant solution. And the Crown-operated system is very intuitive and very smooth.
And what's really cool about it, too, is that you have the ZM model, which is a German abbreviation for central minutes. It works like an old Lemania caliber.
Yeah, it's a very readable dial, very nice case, satinized case, and very comfortable watch to wear.
And again, not another one of those watches that doesn't cost $80,000 to get into. Do you customize it at all?
Nope, that was a limited run for an authorized dealer in California of, I think, 15 or 20 pieces. So fortunate to have that piece in my collection. I like that a lot.
Now, you mentioned previous when we were talking about the watches that you do enjoy having a degree of exclusivity to a brand. It's not necessarily the price of the watch, it's the supply. And with something like this, the supply is low. Tell me a little bit about how exclusivity factors into your purchase decisions.
Yeah, I just think both from a value retention standpoint on the secondary market, but also from when you're with fellow watch collectors, I like wearing pieces that are a little more rare and a little more unique that are unlikely to be found on somebody else's wrist.
And that's a good way to look at it, and especially with these smaller brands where there is some scope for customization, that's definitely on the table. Yeah. Sometimes, though, you just get lucky, and I guess this is the epitome of that. Your Grönefeld 1941 Remontoir. What's the story behind this?
Yeah, so really learned about Grönefeld, back before they took off in popularity, and during one of the Watch Time New York events in October a number of years back, looked at that watch in an authorized dealer in New York, Cellini in New York, and I could have purchased a 1941 Remontoir right out of the case at that point in time. I chose to order this model with the Kari Voutilainen dial, which is just an absolutely beautiful dial execution. It waited a year for the watch to be delivered, and by the time the watch was delivered, the popularity of the brand had skyrocketed, and all 188 pieces of that that Remontoir were sold out.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that because the watch came out in 2016. At Dubai Watch Week in 2019, people were already saying that they're accounted for.
Yeah.
Like they're not done making them, but the ones that will be made are accounted for. Not only did you walk into a dealer and see one in a case, you had a chance to put in a custom order.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of what Tim and Bart do. They're approachable. They like to have fun. I own a couple of other Grönefeld watches, and I'm just a big fan of the brand.
And that's a really good point. They are fun. The Horological brothers, they're almost too much fun. I can't stay out as late or drink as hard or party as hard as they can.
Yeah.
But you did express to me that you think if you're going to have a successful independent brand, there has to be a dynamic, accessible person or people behind it.
Yeah, and I think whether that's Tim and Bart or Xavier at Czapek or Max Buser or Edward Milan at H. Moser, I think a brand executive, whether he's the owner or the watchmaker or the executive of the brand that interacts with collectors in the collector community is really vital for the long-term viability of the brand.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it just makes it more fun. Like some of these guys are on our Facebook groups.
Yeah, absolutely. And very engaged and very responsive, which is fun.
Yeah, Edouard Milan, both of the Grönefeld brothers, they're out there, they're posting on private Facebook groups, and they take a level of interest that, say, I would say the CEO of Omega probably doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would also say this, a lot of these brands don't have long history. Some brands that do, like Breguet, oversell people who've been dead for centuries, whereas with these, it doesn't hurt that they don't have a pedigree because they are so personal and accessible today.
Well, they are the brand. I mean,
it's true. F.P. Journe, he invented and made it. It says so on the dial.
Yeah.
So this is a really cool piece. Did you opt for the hands as well with the matte hands and the matte indices to match?
Yes, yeah, for legibility. I just find I'm a dial aesthetic guy and collector first, and legibility is an important part of my collecting philosophy.
It's also really cool how much cross-pollination there is between these guys because you've got Benzinger and Habring, and you've got Kari, Voutilainen, and Grönefeld. It's like it's a big circle of friends.
Yeah, that is a watch that's a customized, bespoke dial. And again, talking about getting lucky and fortunate timing, it's a watch that I worked with Kari and my authorized dealer to create. And it was about a 14 or 15-month process. Tim, I think today that's probably 3, 4, or a 5-year process to create a bespoke Kari Voutilainen watch.
Well, this watch came out in 2011. It was the successor to the Observatoire. When did you order yours that you could still get it done in a reasonable time frame?
You know, so that probably goes back to maybe 2019.
Yeah, just before everything got crazy.
Yeah, which is the theme on a number of these pieces, catching it before the market went nuts.
Now, when you were conceiving the watch, did you have any interaction with Voutilainen or his staff?
Yeah, through the authorized dealer, just questions back and forth. But I really fell in love with this optical illusion dial, the enameled optical illusion dial, and obviously Kari does great guilloche work. The teardrop lugs are a signature of his, and I just love them from a design aesthetic. The platinum case, I mean, that is you have it in your wrist. That's a heavy watch. It's
without a doubt. I can feel it in my hand.
Yeah.
Now, it's a very exciting piece because there is a lot of customization, including, unless I'm mistaken, the bridges and the plates. Did you go with that particular type of coating?
Yes, I think that's a black gold finish on there as something just to make it a little bit more distinctive and unique.
And would you say tailoring is also a big part of the appeal of the independent scene?
Yeah, I think customizing pieces, although, there's a mix in here of some things where I've had pieces tailored and, to my specific liking, but other pieces that are just a more limited quantity of something that is done in a series of 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 watches.
Now, this is really cool right here. This is one of 50, but the way I understand it, with the Northern Lights, really no two of the 50 are exactly alike, this customization within.
They're all a little bit different. What attracted me to the GOS was the collaboration that he does with the Damascus steelmaker, with James Thompson Black Badger on the Badger Light, and Benzinger on the dial here, as well as some other collaborators that work on this watch. I just think it's particularly unique, different, and something like no other watch that you see.
And it really is another example of how these guys are I mean, in theory, economic competitors, but they're really all sort of friends. Benzinger did the dial. Benzinger did this watch. You've got a Schwarzetium movement in the back. They make, for example, Messina Lab, Ming, Havid Nagan watches, and many, many others. You've got James Thompson and Black Badger, who's a stakeholder in Argonaut, and yet here he is helping out GOS. And actually, I think there's another supplier who's not really watch-specific, but the person who makes that crystal.
Correct. A Swedish crystal maker. Yeah.
And when I first saw this strap, I thought it was lizard, but it's not that at all, is it? I think it's, I want to say salmon?
Salmon.
And I look at it, I'm like, oh, that's a lizard. And then I'm like, no, wait, it's
Very
not.
unique strap, though. Very unique.
And as I understand, also made in Scandinavia. I think also made in Sweden.
Right.
So Sjögren, he's a watchmaker and a businessman. But Gustafsson, he's a bladesmith.
Yeah.
And how does that express itself in the watch?
Well, the casework, if you take a look at the pin buckle, all of the Damascus work on the dial, I just haven't seen that. It's not very common in Switzerland or Germany or Japan. So, I just think it's a true expression of where they come from.
And it's the only watch I've ever seen where the hands aren't loomed, but the rest of the dial is so bright, it's intended to be viewed at night by the glow of its chapter ring.
Again, a very legible, readable dial.
And a lot of fun. I mean, this is a watch that's a reasonable size. It's about 41 millimeters. It's made of a type of steel. It's got a broadly pleasing dial color, and no two are going to be exactly alike. And again, this is not something that's going to require you to remortgage the house.
Exactly. Very approachable.
Okay, maybe this one will require you to remortgage the house. This is a little bit more upscale. But still, I feel like with de Bethune, especially one of these watches where they're going to make 2 to 10 per year, you're getting what you pay for. How were you drawn to the kind of 2?
When I saw the uniqueness of this watch, and I loved the brand, and I followed the brand for a long time, and I saw the 2 different dial variants of this watch, to me, it was like owning a DB25 and a DB28 all in one watch. And that's what clicked for me. And I fell in love with it. This is a watch that it's a 10-piece limited edition, and this is actually number 1 of 10, and one of the favorite pieces in my collection for sure.
And it's got a beautiful architecture. I've often said finish is just the way movement pieces are decorated, but architecture is their shape, the size, how they're juxtaposed in relation to each other. The deltoid bridge over the barrels, it's almost like the weird middle Frank Lloyd Wrights.
Well, I think a lot of de Bethunes get accused of being the Star Trek motif. I wear the watch equally on that side as I do on the more conservative, conventional side, which is a beautiful dial as well.
Now, do you like that duality? It can be as crazy as an Urwerk on one side and as sensible as a Voutilainen on its flip side?
I think it's like owning 2 distinct watches in one.
Now, here's the thing with de Bethune. Denis Flageolet, he pervades this design. You can just see his philosophy in every part of it. But he is not personally a vocal, charismatic guy. He's the kind of watchmaker who's maybe more cerebral, whereas, I would say F.P. Journe or Xavier, the CEO of Czapek, is purely ebullient and emotional. This guy's more cerebral. What is the appeal of Denis' connection to the watch? Because you almost never see or hear from him.
Well, if you take a look at some of the work that's been done recently on video of Denis, it's very, very fascinating. But the fortunate thing is there's other executives behind the brand that really speak for the brand and are out front and engaged with collectors. I think, and obviously WatchBox is now an owner of the brand, and I think that's been a very positive for the financial stability and the future of the brand. But I think the watches are just absolutely breathtaking.
And I do think that there are some watchmakers who are maybe like more cerebral, more intellectually focused, less of a public face. You've got people like Denis Flageolet, you've got people like Kari Voutilainen, who's really a very soft-spoken individual.
Yes.
Or, someone like Bernard Lederer, where the watch is unbelievable, but he's just a very quiet background kind of guy.
Right, exactly.
So would you say maybe sometimes an independent brand doesn't need a charismatic figure so much as it needs, I would say, someone with gravitas?
I think that's right. Yeah, somebody whose work clearly speaks for itself.
And this is a de Bethune when you see it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so speaking of someone who maybe does love the limelight, is that spokesman, 1,000-watt smile, Xavier de Roquemorel, Czapek. They were kind of a fun but low-key brand until the Antarctique. I mean, that brings us to the present. What's going on here?
Yeah, so this is a limited edition of 25 pieces for one of their U.S. authorized dealers. And I take a look at Czapek, and I was into the brand before the Antarctique. I'm very fond of the brand and engaged with the brand. And I think if you kind of take a look at the brand pre-Antarctique and post-Antarctique, it's almost like two different companies. The Antarctique has been a huge, huge success. Very difficult. There's a long wait for Antarctiques now. This is a hand-painted dial. Each one of the 25 variants of this watch are uniquely different. And to me, this has a little bit of an outer space look, or maybe a Hawaiian island, water island look, depth to it. And I like the fact that each of these is a unique dial.
That's funny. You've got the Northern Lights here with GOS, and then you've got something that may as well be the Northern Lights here with Czapek.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, it's fun, and the people behind the brand are awesome. Xavier did an interview with me that started with him walking through a snowstorm and talking to me on his camera phone. I'm like, dude, just get inside and warm up. He's like, oh, no, we're good. I'm like, are you sure?
It's a great brand and very, very bright future for sure. You know, the bracelet on this watch wears as comfortably as a Nautilus or a Royal Oak or an overseas bracelet. It's extremely comfortable to wear.
And it's not derivative. I mean, look, you don't look at it and say, oh yeah, Gerald Gent. You say, okay, this is an homage to the 70s, but it's not plagiarizing one specific reference. And it's full of fun features like the quick release bracelet, the accessory strap, the micro rotor movement by Emmanuel Boucher. There's a lot to love here.
There's a lot to love. I agree.
So which one of these watches gets the most wrist time? Because obviously I'm looking at platinum dress watches and steel sports watches. I would think the steel, but then again, you're not predictable like that.
Yeah, that's an easy grab-and-go piece, but I do rotate my watches, and I would say it's like, who's your favorite child? I can't pick my favorite. They get equal wrist time. All of them are worn in rotation.
Now, watches that don't get worn, is that how you decide what to trade out or sell out of your collection?
Yeah, I think like a lot of collectors, if I find that it's something that I'm just not opting to pick up out of my watch box, then maybe that's something that becomes a candidate to trade in down the road.
Okay, so you're not like the type who just buys and never sells. You do see like some value in keeping the ones that are favorite.
Oh, my collection's constantly changing and morphing I do quite a bit of trading, a little bit of selling, but the collection itself changes over time.
We were also talking about value, and I think there's a lot of different ways to define value. You can get a lot for relatively little, or you can get a lot for a lot. And I think sometimes that's kind of where Greubel Forsey is coming from. The watches are expensive and spectacular, but they live up to the legend. Was this Vision 24-second your first Greubel?
It is, first and only, yes.
What drew you to this? Because this is a little bit more pared down compared to their usually Baroque style.
Well, aspirationally, I always wanted to step into Greubel Forsey, but a lot of the watches are simply too big, or a lot of them have that bump out on the case at 7 or 8 o'clock, so it's not a round case. And then some of their watches just have too much script on the dial or the case. The chapter according to Greubel Forsey. So design aesthetic-wise, they didn't appeal to me. And when I saw this watch, more contemporary wearable size, 43.5 millimeter case size, not a lot of dial writing and script on the case, and just a more traditional look and feel. Clearly one of the most finely finished watches that I own and that I've handled. And it's a beautiful watch. The thing that caused me pause on this watch was on the case back, there's a little bit of a bubble. I call it a wart on the back. And I worried how that would sit on my wrist, but I read about how Bethune or Greubel Forsey did so much work in designing that watch to make sure that it wouldn't be an impediment to somebody wearing it on their wrist. And you put it on the wrist, you've had it on your wrist, you don't feel that bubble at all.
And, a lot of people have said to me with Greubel Forsey or the Zenith Christophe Coulomb, they're like, I could never wear that thing because it's got a bubble on the bottom. I'm like, yeah, but you don't feel it. Your skin is soft. It is small. Give it a chance.
And it hugs your wrist. You don't feel that and see that at all.
Now, this is also an award winner, GPHG 2015, I believe.
Yes.
And 24-second tourbillon. So this is actually a tourbillon that has a separate constant seconds hand, because the tourbillon is making a full pirouette every 24 seconds.
24 seconds, yeah.
That's a monster watch. And
Inclined at 25 degrees, I believe.
it's got a manic heartbeat, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting piece because I think you can love a model without necessarily loving the whole brand. You talked to me about how some Greubels, the graphics get ridiculous, the text is excessive, some of the cases are too big. Would you say that's sort of how you feel about Romain Gauthier, or do you envision yourself as a full-line Gauthier collector down the line?
Yeah, I've always wanted a logical one, and never opted to purchase one when they were still in production. After they became discontinued, I had that watch on my watch list, if you will, for a long period of time. And there are many varieties, many different metal, case metal varieties and dial varieties of the logical one. And it was just a matter of finding the right one. And I wanted a precious metal logical one, and I wanted something with contrast that would show off both the dial side finishing as well as the case back finishing, the movement finishing. And when this became available from WatchBox, it's something that I knew that I had to have.
It is a fun piece, and I'll say this, some watches are unnecessarily big. This is just about big enough to contain the movement. Like architecturally, from the winding system all the way over to the barrel, I mean, that is pretty much the entire scope of the case. It's a 43, but it is a packed 43.
And I don't think that collectors really should pay attention to strict written dial size. You have to try it on your wrist. That watch fits better than some 40 and 41 millimeter watches that I have on my wrist. It's about how it fits on your wrist and sits on your wrist, and that is a great piece that wears, to me, on my wrist, it wears more like a 41 or a 42 than a 43.
So you mentioned that you wanted precious metal. Do you subscribe to the school of thought that a luxury watch shouldn't feel too light, or is it just this specific model?
No, it was just that specific model because of the finishing. I own titanium watches, and I like the feel of that, and there's a time and a place to grab a light watch.
Do you fall in love with the dial or the movement? Because I see a variety here.
Yeah.
You've got solid gold with the Journe, you've got guilloche with Benzinger, you've got enamel with the logical one from Gauthier, and then you've got a little bit of a mix with some of the others, from Kari to Bethune, and a combination of guilloche and enamel with Kari.
I'm absolutely a dial guy first, and movement finishing second. Legibility becomes a secondary factor, so it's dial aesthetics, but then it's legibility of the watch. I have to be able to read the watch. Well, I've owned some alternative timekeeping pieces, and I learned through my collection journey that I like a more traditional method.
And you definitely have that, and we always say you can't wear them upside down, so go with the dial. I take that back. You can wear this one upside down,
yeah.
So that's the one exception. Now, in terms of sports watches versus dress watches, overwhelmingly dress watches. Is that an accident, or do you just prefer dress timepieces?
You know, I would say that I actually like what I would, my own phraseology, but I like more of a hybrid watch, a watch that I could wear with jeans and a t-shirt as comfortably as a sport coat or suit. So, you know, not a tremendous amount that I think that fall into a strict dress-only suit sport coat type attire. I like a watch that I can wear in a variety of settings.
And I think a watch that really epitomizes that is the one we've got right here, where we have Laurent Ferrier. We have, you know, a case that's stainless steel, reasonably sized, a high horology movement, a complication to match. This is a dress watch made of steel, and you could wear this every day.
I think that's a watch that falls definitely in that dress, sport, hybrid type category. Again, here I fell in love with the dial, the light blue numerals, the pop of color with the red. It's an easy watch to set. It's an easy watch to wear, very contemporary size. And I think, Tim, that Laurent Ferrier is a brand that's a bit underrated and potentially has some upside in popularity and value retention down the road.
And I think it's a great opportunity. These are not cheap watches even used, but I do think when you look at the internet, you realize what's available, you know, basically for point-and-click purchase. The stuff that's available oftentimes bears no relation to the quality of the watch itself. The most available stuff, you can go out easily, find Romain Gauthier, find Greubel Forsey, find Laurent Ferrier. These are some of the best finished and most thoughtfully conceived watches you can find. As much as, I respect Journe, I tend to love that other stuff that flies a bit under the radar.
I love all the pieces, and I think it represents a very, very diverse collection. It's not my entire independent collection. I like the mainstream brands. I own Rolex and Patek and Omega and JLC and Longa, and I'm a fan of those as well. But I think it's nice to have a variety of independents in your collection.
I also think that it's great to look at things that, frankly, depreciate a little bit. Like, I know that's not a great way to talk about the independent scene, but being able to find something that's a relative value in as much as it costs less used than it did new, we take that for granted in the world of cars and consumer goods, and most watches are priced that way. Ulysse Nardin, Girard-Perregaux,
Sure.
Omega. I think it's important to remember that even at the top of the independent market, if you go out and you find a Greubel Forsey double tourbillon 30 degree for $250,000, that's a lot of money. But new, it's going to be $450, $500, $600. And when you look at a chronomètre bleu that costs 3 times retail, it's still a cool watch, but I don't understand the inertia behind that. I don't understand the groundswell, the snowball.
Well, right or wrong, just a personal collecting philosophy is I never pay over retail for a watch. So that limits me from purchasing hype watches on the secondary market and certain brands on the secondary market, but it anchors my collecting philosophy.
Now, in terms of the future, there are other independent brands out there. There are many that are not represented on the table, and then there are watches from these companies that are still on their way. What do you have your sights on for the future?
Well, I've got a few more independents that, with the long lead times and wait times, I've got a few more independents coming down the road. I have a Grönefeld chronograph, one of the tantalum pieces. I think that was a limited edition of 25 pieces. I expect that sometime in the next 12 to 18 months. And when Josh Shapiro introduced his latest American-made masterpiece with his bespoke movement, I opted to put a deposit down, and that'll be sometime late next year when I get my Shapiro.
I mean, that'll be a great occasion for a follow-up.
Absolutely.
I think it's really cool. It's a lot of fun. And, I'm wearing my Garrick today, and I think it's important to remember that independent brands as small as an Ordain or a Garrick or a Kadoka or something like a Benzinger or a GOS or a Habring, you can get into that world of a company like Habring that makes dozens, not hundreds of watches per year, and you can get there for the same price you would spend on an Omega or a Breitling or a Nomos. And it's a little bit scary to look at watches that cost 5 figures and 6 figures, but that's not that is not to the exclusion of other options in the independent space. It's like when I look at these custom bikes and I realize, well, they're expensive, and then I realize I could spend the same amount of money and get a stock Trek. For the same amount of money, wouldn't you want a more personal experience?
Completely agree with that philosophy.
So if you have advice for folks who want to get into the independent scene, where do they start?
Start slow. There's a lot of options at accessible price points, and a lot of great content on WatchBox to take a look at independents of different price points, different complications, different dial aesthetics. There's just a lot of independent watchmakers that are available. So,
where do you get your news? Where do you get your information online when you're researching a purchase?
I look at a lot of the mainstream watch publications, but I think my collector community and my philosophy is when I'm researching a particular watch, the first thing I do is I go to WatchBox Studios and try to find a review by Tim Masso.
It is an encyclopedia, even if I am not. I try to live up to it.
I think you are an encyclopedia, and I think most people believe you are.
Well, I have to be humble. I learn something new every day, and I get stumped by something new every day. I think the most important thing is that you make this social, because I'm sure you associate these watches with people, places, experiences. Talk a little bit about the importance of a watch being an experience more than just a purchase.
Yeah, I think the experience in purchasing a watch from the watchmaker, from the brand directly, or through the authorized dealer, or to mark a special occasion, to create something unique in your collection, that becomes very, very memorable on when you bought the watch, maybe what you sacrificed and traded in to purchase that particular watch. Question for you, Tim.
Yeah.
Of the watches on the table here, I'm guessing that there's probably only one piece here that you may not have seen before, and I'm guessing that might be the Benzinger.
Yeah, Benzinger is super rare. Out of Pforzheim, it's traditionally a place in Germany that's known for doing jewelry. Actually, the Schäufele family that bought Chopard came down from Pforzheim. It's not traditionally the biggest watchmaking center, And as I understand it, Benzinger watches are mostly just made to order. So my chance of encountering something like that outside of Germany or your collection is pretty much zero.
Yeah, it's a great piece and a great brand.
So another question, if you could give advice to yourself 15 years ago when you first started in independence, would you do it all the same, or have there been any lessons learned?
Yeah, I don't think that, I really don't dwell on any, collecting mistakes, if you will, that I've made along the way. Try different things. There's independents that I've owned that haven't worked out for me. They haven't been, the right format, the right watch, the right aesthetic for me. The one advice that I'd give people, whether it's independents or mainstream brands, is do your research, go slow. You don't have to conquer the watch collecting world in a month or a year.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. I would also say I really agree with your philosophy of not paying over list. And this is coming from a pre-owned vendor who has stuff available over MSRP. But I really do think that there's such diversity and quality out there that you can get something even more exciting than a marked up watch if you just do a little bit of research to learn that it exists.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
Is there a Grail watch as yet unrealized?
No, and I don't really believe in that, because I think for me, almost everything here was a Grail watch at one point in time. So there's nothing on my horizon that I'm aspiring to. Maybe if there were something that I'd love to have in the collection that I don't have, that I probably won't have anytime soon, it would be a Reshapy watch.
And you said you don't have a Grail watch.
Well, I guess.
Rick, thank you so much.
Tim, great talking with you. Thank you.